What happens when a little girl in a simple blue dress storms a perfect wedding, shouting, "That's my daddy"? You won't believe how that moment shattered the illusion and forced everyone to face the truth. Never in my wildest dreams did I imagine that a little girl could storm into the middle of a wedding and turn everything upside down. Right there, under a white tent that smelled like cheap champagne and wilted roses. But that's exactly what Leia did. She was like a black hurricane crashing through a sea of glittering smiles and delicate china. When she screamed, "That's my daddy!" It wasn't just a shout. It was a wrecking ball smashing through the polished facade everyone was pretending was flawless. You see, this wasn't some random explosion of chaos. It was like sitting front row at a play, all comfy and settled, knowing every line and cue. Then suddenly an unknown actor storms the stage and rewrites the entire script. That was Laya. She wasn't here to ask for permission or tiptoe around the edges. She was here to expose the truth, raw and unapologetic. Picture this. A little girl, dark-skinned, wearing a simple blue dress that had seen better days, with a worn backpack hanging off one shoulder. That backpack wasn't stuffed with toys or snacks. No, it carried the weight of her entire life story. A story many powerful folks tried hard to shove under the rug. She didn't have fancy shoes or ribbons in her hair, just eyes. Eyes that had seen too much hurt to bother pretending anymore. Now imagine the guests, just moments ago sipping wine and swaying gently to the violin's melody, suddenly freezing as this small figure strides confidently down the aisle. Nobody knew what to expect. Some probably thought it was a prank or a stunt designed to ruin the day. But at the altar stood John Marshall, slick lawyer, power player, man who thought his life was a perfectly edited movie where he controlled the script. His face was cold, like someone who'd just realized that the "Do Not Disturb" sign on his life had been ripped off without his say-so. But Laya wasn't stepping back. She didn't just claim he was her father, she brought receipts. A DNA test folded neatly inside a clear plastic sleeve. That little packet wasn't just a scrap of paper with numbers. It was a middle finger to the system that had punished her mother for daring to be a black woman in a world that treats her skin like a liability. Seconds after her scream stretched into eternity, the tent held its breath. John didn't speak at first. He just stared, like a ghost from a past he'd tried to bury had come knocking. His fiancée, Mallory, stood like a statue carved from ice, her eyes burning with a cold fury. The kind of anger that screams, "This party just turned into a public trial." Whispers began to ripple through the crowd. "It's just a child," someone said. "A joke," murmured another. But Laya held John's gaze without flinching. No tears, no hesitation, just ironclad resolve, the kind that only those who have clawed through decades of pain can carry. And that's when the real story begins. Not about the wedding, not about the vows or flowers, but about the truth, the kind buried beneath years of silence and lies. You ready to watch a little girl tear down facades built by others for generations? Now let me take you deeper. Not just into the moment, but into what it meant, how it felt to be that girl standing alone and speaking truth to a room full of rich folks who thought their wealth could buy invisibility. Laya wasn't just some random kid. She was the daughter of a woman who'd fought tooth and nail just to survive in a town that didn't want her. Her mother, Rosa, was a fighter, a proud, unyielding soul who worked double shifts cleaning offices while raising Laya alone. Rosa had carried the scars of systemic cruelty, the kind that can't be seen but cuts deeper than any knife. Hospital bills unpaid, job offers rescinded the moment her name was spoken, whispers behind backs, all because she was black. Leia grew up watching her mother's weary eyes, listening to stories about doors slammed shut, chances denied, opportunities stolen by invisible hands. So when Rosa passed away 2 months earlier, worn out by sickness and heartbreak, Leia was left with nothing but memories and a burning question. Why had the man who called himself father never lifted a finger? This wedding, this celebration of privilege, was where Leia chose to confront that silence. She wasn't some desperate girl begging for attention. No, she was a storm, a reckoning. And that DNA test? It wasn't just science. It was her weapon, her proof against a world that tried to erase her existence. She walked down the aisle with the weight of her past and the hopes of her mother on her shoulders. The fancy shoes clicked against the polished floor. The murmurs rose like a tide. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure if this was a scene from a movie or a nightmare made real. John Marshall's face was the picture of denial at first. A man who thought he could keep his past locked away like a vault. But when he saw that DNA test, his expression cracked. The man who'd built his life on winning cases, controlling narratives, suddenly faced a truth that no amount of money could bury. Mallory, his bride-to-be, was pure ice. She narrowed her eyes, lips pressed tight. Her world was cracking, and she hated every second of it. For her, Laya was a threat, a blemish on a picture-perfect life, a challenge to a carefully curated future. Guests exchanged glances. Some whispered, some gasped. Is this real? Who let her in? This isn't right. But Leia didn't care. She held her ground. She stared at John and said, voice steady as steel, I'm not here to ruin your day. I'm here for the truth. The tent seemed to shrink, the air thick with tension. The violin's melody was drowned out by the pounding of hearts and the weight of unspoken stories. You can almost hear the walls whispering, the lies, the silences, the betrayals finally breaking free. Laya was not just a girl at a wedding. She was every unheard voice, every shadowed truth, every injustice shoved aside. And on that day, she reminded everyone present, and those who would hear the story later, that you cannot silence a truth waiting to be told. Now, if you think this is just a dramatic scene, buckle up. Because what followed shattered more than just a wedding. It shook the very foundations of a family, a community, and a system built on keeping people like Laya invisible. So, are you ready for what comes next? Because this story isn't done yet. And trust me, you don't want to miss what happens when truth meets power head-on. The air inside that fancy white tent thickened like a heat wave on a summer afternoon in the South. Stifling, heavy, and impossible to ignore. The kind of heat that crawls under your skin, digging in deep where the truth tends to hide. And truth, my friend, was now center stage, with no curtain left to hide behind. John Marshall, the slick lawyer who strutted through life like he owned every sidewalk and courtroom in the city, was suddenly a man stripped bare. No fancy suits could shield him now. No polished smile, no smooth talk. He was standing there frozen like a puppet whose strings got cut, eyes wide and searching for a script he lost years ago. Across from him, Mallory, his soon-to-be bride, transformed from the elegant, cold ice queen into something more primal, more venomous. Her voice sliced through the murmurs like a serpent ready to strike. You knew about this, didn't you? She hissed, venom dripping from every syllable. You kept this secret like it was some dirty little stain on your perfect life. Her words weren't just accusations, they were daggers, aimed to wound, to shame, to fracture the shiny illusion they'd all been living in. Because that's the thing about families like theirs, where skin color becomes a weapon wielded in shadows, where truths are locked away like state secrets, and denial is the currency everyone trades in. Mallory's icy glare locked onto Laya, the little girl who dared to speak louder than the silence. Laya, with her skin like rich earth and eyes that had seen more storms than any child should, stared right back, steady and unyielding. Not a tear, not a flinch. Just the kind of quiet strength that makes you realize this fight was already won in the heart long before it showed on the outside. I'm not here to throw a tantrum, Laya said, her voice calm but cutting, like a razor wrapped in silk. I'm here because she was my mother, and she died 2 months ago, without help, without the man who should have been there. She pulled out a worn photo from her backpack, holding it up like a badge of honor and pain all at once. A hospital room. Her mother, Rosa, pale and frail, clutching a faded blanket. A sign on the bedside table. For John Marshall, forgive me. We wrote to you, Leia said, voice steady but heavy with years of heartbreak. But you pretended not to hear. The room shifted. The easy laughter and clinking glasses fell silent. Guests who'd been smiling minutes ago now averted their eyes. Some shifted uncomfortably, as if witnessing a private grief they weren't meant to see. But nobody could look away. Not really. John opened his mouth, but the words got lost somewhere between guilt and disbelief. "I didn't know," he began, but it sounded like a weak echo in a vast empty hall. One of his colleagues from the law firm, a man used to wearing expensive suits and navigating boardrooms, leaned forward, voice sharp with betrayal. "You knew, John. You changed your number, moved into that mansion uptown, tried to bury the past, but you couldn't run from this." Mallory didn't wait for a response. Her hands clenched the bouquet. Then with a sudden, dramatic snap, she hurled it to the ground. The flowers scattered like broken promises, petals crushed beneath polished shoes. She turned and stormed out of the tent, leaving a wake of cold silence and sharp questions hanging in the air. But Laya? She stood unmoved, like a rock carved by a river's relentless flow, her jaw set, her gaze unwavering. Because this was the moment she'd waited for. The moment her voice, long silenced, finally pierced through. And that's when things took a turn. Because truth, especially the kind wrapped in pain and shame, always makes folks uncomfortable. Someone in the crowd fumbled for their phone, the one tool that could amplify whispers into roars. A journalist. The buzzing started almost immediately. Drones lifted off like angry hornets, buzzing over heads, capturing every twitch, every glance. Cameras turned toward the small girl who had just upended a carefully curated life. Pressure mounted on John, thick as the dark storm clouds rolling in on a hot July day. Eyes, once curious, hardened into judgment. This wasn't a private family matter anymore. It was a trial in the court of public opinion, with every guest an unwilling juror. Inside John, the storm was raging. He felt the walls closing in, the carefully built house of cards shaking. His life? A facade built on polished lies and selective memory. Fear warred with pride, shame with desperation. He wanted to run, to hide, to erase this day from existence. But he couldn't. Not anymore. Meanwhile, Laya stood tall amidst the chaos. Her humor, sharp as a blade, shielded her from breaking. She thought, "Look at this. Big white boy from the mansion thinking money can buy him a clean slate." But no, this time his dollars won't cover up the truth. Her words weren't just accusations. They were a challenge hurled straight at a system that's been trained to turn a blind eye to people like her, to dismiss their pain, to ignore their rights. And in that charged silence, the world started to shift. People began to see them differently, not as the neat little pieces fitting into a picture-perfect scene, but as real human beings tangled in messy truths. That's the raw power of a moment like this. A moment where the untold stories push through the cracks, demanding to be heard. So here's the thing. This wasn't just a breakdown of a wedding ceremony. This was a breaking point for a man, a family, and a society that long ago decided what stories were worthy and which ones got buried in silence. This is the kind of story that forces us to reckon with uncomfortable realities, where power meets pain and truth dares to fight back. Are you ready to see how this all plays out? Because what you just witnessed is only the start. The real battle is yet to come. And trust me, you won't want to blink when the curtain rises on what happens next. Picture the scene again. The once bright and hopeful wedding tent, where the scent of roses and the soft clinking of champagne glasses still lingered, had transformed into an arena charged with raw, unfiltered truth. The delicate veil of celebration was ripped away, leaving exposed the unvarnished reality beneath. Above, drones circled like hawks, their buzzing capturing every nuanced glance, every trembling breath, every hesitant step. Cameras flashed and zoomed, not missing a single moment of what had now become a spectacle of confrontation and revelation. At the center of this storm stood John Marshall, a man who once carried himself with the certainty of a king, commanding respect and wielding power like armor. But now, stripped of that armor, he looked less like a ruler and more like a man caught in a trap, each moment under the glaring eyes of the crowd transforming into a sentence being passed. His face told a story all on its own: fear, regret, and a helplessness that no amount of money or influence could mask. The silence hung thick for a long, tense beat before he finally spoke. Voice low, cracked, and filled with a sorrow that cut through the buzz of the crowd like a knife. I was blind. I was afraid. But I can't close my eyes anymore. Those words weren't just a reluctant apology. They were a confession, a declaration from a man finally forced to confront the crumbling of the system he'd lived by and served for so long. The man who once thought himself untouchable was now standing at a crossroads, forced to change not just his actions, but the very core of who he was. But Leia wasn't there to accept platitudes. Her voice, calm yet commanding, carried the weight of years of pain and unyielding hope. She demanded justice, not pity. The DNA test, once just a piece of paper, had become a symbol, a beacon shining through the thick fog of lies and prejudice that had shrouded her family's truth for far too long. Law enforcement showed up not to silence her, but to ensure order and to affirm the facts. Detective Rogers, a seasoned man whose eyes reflected years of witnessing similar heartbreaks, held the test results with a steady hand and an expression that refused to take sides. His role wasn't to judge emotion or family drama, but to uphold the law and verify the truth. And the science was irrefutable. The crowd stilled. The air that once carried the lightness of celebration now felt heavy with the gravity of revelation. What had been a gathering cloaked in forced smiles and polite conversation had shifted into a moment of bitter but necessary justice. Mallory, desperate to reclaim control of the unraveling scene, tried to step forward and interfere, but she was met with firm resistance, both from the police and from the undeniable shift in public opinion, which had started to rally around Leia, recognizing the courage in her voice. Yet the real victory wasn't the legal validation or the public support. It was inside John Marshall himself. Gone was the man hiding behind layers of social status, money, and carefully crafted facades. Standing in the light of truth, he began to transform. No longer just a figure of privilege, he took the first steps toward becoming an activist. A man willing to confront the discrimination he'd once ignored and to use his platform to help those still searching for their voices. And Leia? She became a beacon, proof that strength can be found even in the darkest moments. Her courage sent ripples far beyond the walls of that tent, inspiring not only her own family and community, but anyone who has ever faced injustice and felt powerless. So if you ever thought justice was just a distant dream, unreachable and reserved for someone else, it's time to think again. Sometimes truth explodes from the most unexpected places, from the voice of a little girl who refused to be silenced. And this story, it's living proof of that. Let me break down this transformation in more detail so you feel every beat, every breath, and every crack in this shifting world. From the moment John's lips parted and the words tumbled out, "I was blind. I was afraid." It was like watching a man drown in his own guilt and shame. The power he once wielded so effortlessly was now slipping through his fingers. He'd built his life and career on being untouchable, a fortress of privilege and denial. But the walls crumbled fast when faced with a truth so raw, it refused to be hidden any longer. Leia's presence was a mirror reflecting not only the man's failings, but a society that too often turns a blind eye. The crowd around them could feel it. This wasn't just family drama. This was the unraveling of a system that condones silence and values image over integrity. The cameras didn't blink. The drones didn't tire. Every phone camera and news feed turned this moment into a public reckoning, forcing even the most indifferent to witness what they might have preferred to ignore. Mallory's reaction was a study in desperation. The woman who had once walked with grace and control now looked like someone watching their carefully constructed castle collapse into dust. Her attempts to interject, to reclaim the narrative, fell flat, not because of lack of effort, but because the tide had turned against her. But amid the chaos, Leia stood firm, embodying the very definition of resilience. This little girl, who had lived through loss and abandonment, was now the voice that would not be silenced. Her sarcasm, her cool humor, was her armor, a shield forged from years of pain and survival. She saw through the facades, read the fear behind the polished smiles, and refused to back down. In her mind, she mocked the illusion of control. Here's this big white boy from the mansion, thinking he can buy his way out of history. But I'm here to prove no amount of money can cover up the truth. That truth, spoken loud and clear, challenged the entire system. It made people uncomfortable. It forced everyone watching to reconsider their own assumptions and biases. It shattered illusions and opened the door for real change. This wasn't just about one family. It was a wake-up call for a society still wrestling with its demons, reminding us all that justice isn't a given, but a battle. And sometimes that battle starts with a voice many tried to silence. So what comes next? Well, if you think this story ends here, think again. The real fight, the fight for acceptance, for acknowledgement, for transformation, is just beginning. And it all starts with the courage of one little girl who dared to demand what was rightfully hers. Are you ready to follow her journey?